So one of the more exciting areas in complexity theory today is arithmetic complexity, which has seen a lot of progress over the last few years. And one of the leaders in this field is Neeraj Kayal. So he'll be starting us off with a survey on the field, and then we'll be getting more talks on the field in the afternoon.
Thanks for organizing the workshop, and thanks for inviting me here. So today I want to present some recent results on arithmetic circuit complexity. It will be some sort of a biased survey of this area. Here's the plan for my talk. I will give you the problems that we care about in this area. I will define these problems, and then I plan to spend a lot of time motivating why we care about these problems. And I will motivate them by relating them to other problems in computer science. And then towards the end, I will present the recent results and give a very brief overview of how some of the lower bound proofs work. Just a very brief sketch, and you will see many more details in the rest of the day today. So what are we concerned with here? We are concerned with arithmetic straight line programs or arithmetic circuits. The straight line programs version of it, they look like this. We have a bunch of inputs, x1 through xn. So think of these inputs as formal variables for now. But if you want, you could think of these as, say, real numbers, and you are going to do a computation over, say, real numbers. And the way the computation proceeds is at each step, you apply an elementary arithmetic operation like addition, subtraction, or multiplication. You add, subtract, or multiply two previous things. And at the end of this, at the last line of your program, you would have computed some function of the inputs. And this will, since we are doing only arithmetic operations, this will be a polynomial function. More generally, if we allow divisions, it will be a rational function. But let's say for now, we allow only additions, multiplications, and subtractions. So this will be a polynomial in the inputs. Exactly the same computational model, we sometimes prefer to view it this way. We call it arithmetic circuits. We just look at this computation graph theoretically. We mark corresponding to each line in the straight line program, we have a node of a graph. The inputs are here at the base, the x's, at the bottommost level of this circuit. And each node of this graph it's a directed acyclic graph, so it represents a computation. And each node is marked with either addition, multiplication, or subtraction. In fact, we sometimes prefer to write subtraction this way, just as an addition, but with coefficient -1 attached to one of the edges to represent that we are doing this particular linear combination of the inputs. Right? And so things go on like this, and at the end, we compute a polynomial function of the inputs. And so here, we will be interested in these kinds of questions. For a given polynomial, what's the smallest arithmetic circuit computing that polynomial? The smallest here is in terms of size, which is the number of gates in the circuit. And we will often be also concerned with the depth of the circuit, which is the length of the longest path from an input node to an output node in the circuit. So any questions about this model? So just to summarize, the inputs are variables x1 through xi. This object, it naturally computes a polynomial, and we are concerned with the size of the computation. And now here are two of the basic questions that we try to address in this area. We want to understand what is it all that you can compute efficiently. And efficiently here I will mean circuits which have size polynomial in the number of inputs. So poly n circuit size will be efficient for me. And the other thing we want to understand is what constitutes efficient parallel computation. So, so we have more precise problems which try to sort of articulate these goals that we have of understanding efficient computation and efficient parallel computation. The first problem is called VP versus VNP. I'll describe it to you in more detail in a minute, but very roughly, it asks whether all explicit polynomials can be computed efficiently or not. And for efficient parallel computation, one thing you can ask is, can every piece of computation be efficiently parallelized? That means, suppose you have a function which has a small circuit. Can you have another circuit which has small depths, which also and has small size and which also computes the same polynomial? So, one more thing I want to mention here, the reason we are concerned with depth here is because in some sense circuits of low depth correspond to computation which is highly parallel. And you can sort of imagine this by seeing that if the length of the path from input to output is small, if you plug in the values of the inputs at time 0, let's say, the number of time steps after which you get the output will depend on the depth. So low depth means highly parallel computation. And so that's why we are interested in the depth. So, so here is another basic question. Is it true that for every piece of computation, you can also do it by another circuit of small depth and not too large a size? So in the Boolean world, this question is of course P versus NC. So in some sense, this corresponds to P versus NP, and this in some sense corresponds to P versus NC. And so let me come back to the VP versus VNP question. Formally, the class VP consists of all families of polynomials, let's say polynomials on n variables, which have degree poly n and can be computed by poly n sized circuits. And VNP is the class of all polynomials which are easy to describe in the following sense, that there is a small circuit which takes any given monomial and outputs the coefficient of the monomial in the circuit. So takes a monomial, takes a description of a monomial in the natural binary representation. And this is one of the major open problems in this area, is VP equal to VNP or not. We believe no, but we don't know how to prove this. So any questions about this? And now let's go on to the other basic question that I posed. Can computation be efficiently parallelized? Now in the Boolean world, we believe that it cannot. That, for example, we believe that linear programming, you cannot have efficient parallel algorithms for linear programming. But the situation is different in the arithmetic world, and this was one of the landmark results in this area, a theorem by Valiant, Skyem, Berkowitz and Rakoff, who showed that essentially you can reduce the depth of any circuit to log d, where d is the degree of the polynomial that is being computed. So more formally, they showed that if you take any circuit of size s and degree d, there is another circuit of size slightly larger, poly s, where this poly is not too bad a poly, it's like s cube. and which has depth log d, log of the degree of the polynomial. And by the way, there's a minor detail here, you can ignore this. Here when I say log d, I'm actually allowing gates with unbounded Fanon, but you can conveniently ignore that detail, it's not very important. Otherwise, this log d will essentially just become log s times log d. So, so basically this says that you can, yes, you can parallelize any piece of arithmetic computation, and we will see one application of this result very shortly. But recently, in the last 10 years, people started asking, can we reduce the depth even further? Can we make the depth even smaller than log d or not? So in general, what if we wanted to make the depth some number delta, let's say 4, 5. So if I start with a circuit of size s, if I want to reduce the depth to delta, what is the price I must pay in terms of the size of the new circuit? And for this more refined question, we don't have the answer. So this is still open, but we have some partial answers, and I will present that today. So on the upper bound side, a bunch of recent results, they investigated this further, and they essentially showed that you can do it with the new circuit having size s to the d to the 2 over delta. So in particular, you can reduce the depth to 4, and the size of the circuit will blow up from s to the square root d. So so this is still a non-trivial result for delta being 4, and it gets better with delta increase as delta increases. And you can see here that as delta goes up to log d, you recover the previous result. The exponent becomes a constant, so you recover the previous result. So this is essentially the best upper bound that we know. I will tell you something a little better than this. But what we don't know is whether this is optimal or not. So this is another very natural open problem. But we do have some partial answers here, and I will tell you about it. And let me also just mention in passing 2 algorithmic problems, which are also fairly natural. One is called polynomial identity testing. Given a circuit C, I want to determine whether the output of the circuit is a 0 polynomial or not. It is sort of, in some sense, the analog of SAT, satisfiability. But there's a major difference. Here we know a efficient randomized algorithm, and I'll tell you in a moment about it. And the other natural question is circuit reconstruction. Basically, I want to algorithmically find a small circuit for a given polynomial. And in some sense, this is an analog of learning Boolean circuits. Now, let me tell you about polynomial identity testing very quickly. So we want to test whether a given circuit computes the 0 polynomial or not. So we have a circuit here, C. The inputs are the xi's. We want to test whether f is identically 0 or not. So here's a very simple thing that one can do. Just plug in random values for the inputs, say R1 through Rn, then evaluate the circuit on these random values and test whether the result is 0 or not. And it turns out that this works with very good probability. That if you choose your inputs from a set of size, let's say twice the degree of the polynomial, you can upper bound the degree of the polynomial here just by looking at the circuit here. So let's say we have some upper bound d on the degree of this polynomial computed by C. And as soon as you choose your random inputs from a large enough set, the probability that A is 0, even though the circuit is non-zero, goes down very quickly. And that essentially gives you an efficient randomized algorithm for it. This is an open problem. Can we de-randomize this? And this also has connections to proving circuit lower bounds. Circuit reconstruction is the problem of learning a circuit for a given polynomial. Let me not spend too much time on it. So these are the sort of the 4 basic questions that we want to understand in this area. What is efficient computation? What is efficient parallel computation? Identity testing and the complexity of learning circuits. So before I go on, any questions about this? Yeah. Let's say, let's say for now you are only allowed to evaluate the polynomial. So you have an oracle which for a given input x, it tells you the value of f of x. So the bulk of this talk I plan to spend in motivating these questions that I just told you. So, so you can imagine very naturally that since we are talking about arithmetic computation, that all these questions will be relevant for things like integer multiplication, matrix multiplication, a bit to numerical analysis also. Now, let me just mention that some of the initial results in this area, for integer multiplication, we know how to multiply two integers, two n-bit integers by circuits of size roughly n log n, but we don't know whether that is optimal or not. For matrix multiplication, we know how to multiply two n by n matrices with a circuit which has size roughly n to the 2.37 now. It is believed generally that you can do it with size roughly n square, but again we don't know. But what I want to do today is I want to tell you about two combinatorial problems related to Hamiltonian cycles and perfect matching. And we'll see how arithmetic circuits are relevant even for these kind of very combinatorial problems, which a priori these problems don't seem to have much to do with arithmetic circuits. So let me tell you about Hamiltonian cycles first. So just recall that what's a Hamiltonian cycle in a graph? Hamiltonian cycle is a cycle which goes through each vertex exactly once. So this is an example of a Hamiltonian cycle, and one way to reformulate the P versus NP question is it easy to determine whether a given graph has a Hamiltonian cycle or not? Essentially, this is because Hamiltonian cycles problem is known to be NP complete. Now let's consider the following. Suppose you consider the complete graph on n vertices now. So this is not an arbitrary graph, a complete graph, and you label the edge joining vertex I and j with the variable xij. Suppose you do this, and now consider this polynomial. This is called the Hamiltonian polynomial. It is the monomials of this polynomial are essentially they correspond to, each monomial corresponds to a Hamiltonian cycle in the following way, that the variables in the monomial are essentially the product of the all the variables on that particular Hamiltonian cycle in the graph. So each monomial is just a product of the variables on the edges of a Hamiltonian cycle. Now the reason this is interesting is because now suppose this was an actual graph. So, xij's now are set to either 0 or 1, depending on whether that edge is present or not in your given graph. Then on such an input, the value of this polynomial will exactly be the number of Hamiltonian cycles in the graph. Because you see here that any monomial, it survives if and only if that the Hamiltonian cycle corresponding to that monomial is present in your given graph or not. Right? So, if this polynomial could be efficiently computed, let us say by a small arithmetic circuit, then you would be able to count the number of Hamiltonian cycles in any given graph. So, it turns out we believe the answer is no, and one reformulation of the VP versus VNP question is the following: can this Hamiltonian polynomial be computed with a circuit having polynomial size? We don't believe this, but in some sense, proving such a thing might be one step towards proving P versus NP, because if it could be done, then P would have been equal to NP. But the converse is not true. That's important. The converse is most likely false. So, resolving VP versus VNP won't resolve P versus NP. Now, I want to tell you about another combinatorial problem, perfect matching. So, consider a bipartite graph. So, a perfect matching in a bipartite graph looks like this. It's a set of edges such that all vertices on the left and on the right are touched exactly once. So, here's an example. In this bipartite graph, the red edges form a matching. It's called a perfect matching. Each vertex on the left and on the right is touched exactly once. So, so you see that each perfect matching very naturally corresponds to a permutation. So, for example, the permutation corresponding to this matching would be 1 maps to 2, 2 maps to 3, 3 maps to 4, and 4 maps to 1. So, now you can, just like we defined the Hamiltonian, you could define another polynomial. It has a funny name, the permanent, like this. It's the sum over all perfect matchings in the complete bipartite graph, essentially. So, again, like the previous thing, you first look at the complete bipartite graph with n vertices on the left and n vertices on the right. Label the edge joining I and j by a variable xij, and now define a polynomial where each monomial corresponds to a matching in the graph, and it corresponds to a matching in the natural way. It is just the product of the edges or the variables on the edges in the matching. Right? Now, once again, just like before, if you are given an actual bipartite graph, so that the xij's will be actually 0 or 1, depending on whether the edge is absent or present in the graph, then the value of this polynomial evaluated on that input will exactly be the number of perfect matchings in the graph. Again, the same argument as before. Each monomial will survive precisely when that matching is 1, when that matching is present. Otherwise, that monomial will be 0. So, now one can ask, can this polynomial be efficiently computed? We don't know, and the belief is no, it cannot be computed efficiently. But now consider a slightly different polynomial. wherein you attach signs in front of the monomials, and the sign is just, sorry, this should be just sign of sigma. The sign is just the sign of the permutation. So the sign is -1 if the permutation is odd and +1 if the permutation is even. Now, if you stare at it, this is precisely the determinant of an n by n matrix. And we know that the determinant can be computed efficiently, for example, by Gaussian elimination. So now this tells you that you can determine whether, now if you combine this with a straightforward identity testing algorithm, it tells you that you can efficiently determine whether a graph has a perfect matching or not. But there's something more. Now, it turns out, since the determinant has a small circuit, it also has a small arithmetic circuit. And now recall this theorem by Vaillant, that in the arithmetic world, things can be efficiently parallelized. So you can squeeze down the depth of the circuit to logarithmic depth, essentially. So the determinant can be computed efficiently in parallel as well. And now if you put this together with a identity testing algorithm, it tells you that determining whether a bipartite graph contains a perfect matching or not that's the best that we know for the permanent. For the Hamiltonian, I don't know anything better than essentially the trivial circuit. And for the determinant, the circuit size is essentially, I might be wrong with the exponent here, but maybe n cube. Probably, sorry, the n to the omega, where omega is the matrix multiplication exponent. Okay. So if you just use this big hammer by Vaillant, that arithmetic computation can be efficiently parallelized, and the fact that the determinant corresponds to perfect matchings, you put them together, you get an efficient parallel algorithm for testing whether a graph has a perfect matching or not. So, right? Okay. One thing maybe I should have mentioned here is that why is it good enough to consider this is because for a given graph, this polynomial is identically 0 if and only if the permanent is identically 0. They have the same set of monomials. So it sort of boils down to testing whether this polynomial is identically 0 for a given graph or not, where you keep, for an edge which is present in the graph, you keep the variable there, but if an edge is absent, you put 0 in the corresponding matrix. So there's a bit of a detail which I skipped here, but this is what we don't know. We don't know whether this randomized algorithm, which essentially the randomness came because of the identity testing, whether this can be removed or not. So this is all that I have to say about the applications here. Any questions? So now I want to describe some recent results, give an overview of some of the recent results. But now this survey will become much more biased. I'll focus only on these two questions, VP versus VNP and efficient parallelization. So Uh, so recently, we showed the following, that there is an explicit polynomial of degree d on d square variables such that the following holds. If you write this polynomial as a sum of product of low degree polynomials, low degree here is square root d, and these factors here, the qij's, they are homogeneous polynomials. Okay. So let me just remind you what homogeneous polynomials are. Homogeneous polynomials are just polynomials where all the monomials have the same degree, the same total degree. So for all the polynomials that I told you about, determinant, permanent, Hamiltonian, they are all homogeneous polynomials. So there is an explicit polynomial of degree d on d square variables such that whenever you write it as a sum of product of low degree polynomials, the number of summands that you need, which is basically the number of qij's that you need, must at least be exponential. Actually, to be precise, exponential in root d log d. So roughly 2 to the root d, if you ignore the log factors. Now, just to give some perspective on this, what we know is that there exists polynomials of degree d on d square variables for which the number of summands must be at least 2 to the d log d. So compare the lower bound that we have, exponential in root d log d, versus what we know by a counting argument. This is a relatively straightforward counting argument. So we know polynomials which are much harder to for such representations than what we can prove here. So there's a lot of room for improvement here. But what we also know is that if you make any improvement on this lower bound, if you improve it to say root d log log d, then it will imply Vp is not equal to Vnp. So in some sense, we seem to be close to resolving Vp versus Vnp. But now, there's unfortunately, it didn't work. So very soon, Fournier, Limaye, Malod, and Srinivasan, they showed the following, that there is an efficient to compute, easily computed polynomial, iterated matrix multiplication. I'll tell you what it is in just a moment. But there's some very easy to compute polynomial, which is just multiplying some roughly d to the 4 matrices, such that for this polynomial also, if you write it as the sum of product of qij's, the lower bound is 2 to the root d log d, and this proof was using the essentially all the same proof technique as before. And for this particular polynomial, iterated matrix multiplication, we know that this is also an upper bound, that it can also be represented in this way, where the number of summands is 2 to the root d log d. So in some sense, it showed that the proof technique that we are using in this result cannot prove anything better than root d log d. So in that sense, it seems to be bad news for Vp versus Vnp. But this also has a good aspect. It turns out that it helps resolve the other question about parallelization of computation that I had posed earlier. So let me describe that. Okay. before I go on, any questions about this, about the statement of these results?
So in your earlier results,
Yeah,
can you just go back? Right.
yeah.
So when you say there exists an explicit family of homogeneous polynomials, do you actually construct this family?
Yes. So here we describe the monomials of this polynomial, this family of polynomials very explicitly, and each monomial essentially is the graph of a univariate polynomial in a finite field of size d. So, so yes, this is really very explicit in the best possible way of defining explicit. But this was not known to be easy to compute. In fact, we believe that it might be difficult to compute, that family that we constructed here. This is just multiplying some number of matrices, maybe, yeah, it's multiplying D matrices of size roughly D to the 5 by D to the 5. So, because we know matrix multiplication is easy, yeah, this polynomial is easy to compute. In fact, it's easy to compute by a depth 4 circuit of so much size. So, so let me tell you about how that and subsequent results give partial answers to this question. So recall the problem I had posed. Suppose if you start with a circuit of size S and you want to compress the depth to delta, what is the best that you can do in terms of the size of this new shallow circuit, depth delta circuit, right? Now, this was the upper bound that was known, S, roughly S to the D to the 2 over delta. So, what we still don't know is whether this upper bound is optimal or not, but we have some partial answers. Well, actually, this is not optimal. So, we give a better lower bound, but there are lower bounds also which nearly match it, but in restricted settings. So, let me describe this. So, first of all, for some very natural class of circuits that we call regular and homogeneous, it turns out that this upper bound is in fact optimal. So, here by a regular and homogeneous circuit, let me explain this. First of all, at each node in the circuit, you should compute a homogeneous polynomial. And secondly, by regularity here I mean the following, that our circuit naturally consists of layers, and the regularity condition is that at each layer all the nodes should have the same fan-in. If these two conditions are satisfied, then this is indeed optimal. And in the specific case of delta being 4, some more recent results, they show that you can remove the regularity condition. Just with homogeneity, you can prove that this bound is optimal.
This is optimal for any delta.
So my feeling is that this is probably optimal, actually somewhat better.
It's regular homogeneous. I mean, it's just that there exists a delta for which it's optimal.
For all delta, where yeah, it's regular and homogeneous, it's optimal. But we also found not a very highly non-homogeneous circuit which improves this upper bound. So the improvement in the upper bound is in the second exponent. Instead of 2 over delta, we gain a factor of 2. It becomes 1 over delta essentially. So in particular, for depth 3 circuits, this was essentially not giving anything, but now for depth 3 circuits, also you can get, you can compress an arbitrary circuit to a depth 3 circuit, the size blows up from S to the square root d. And this, due to further observations by Wigderson and Tavenas, it generalizes for any delta in the following way. Now, I suspect that this is the right answer, that this should be the optimal answer here, but we don't know. What we know is that for this is optimal for delta equal to 3, but even there we know it only with some caveats. But, yeah.
So why do you say that that doesn't give any for delta equals 3?
Oh, actually I ignored some floors here.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah, the second exponent is actually 1 over floor of delta by 2.
Just
Yeah.
So the circuits that produce that upper bound do produce circuits that are regular and homogeneous, right?
Yes, yes, yeah. Yeah, also it turns out, as Sami pointed out, that the circuits which yield this upper bound do turn out to be regular and homogeneous. So essentially this is my survey, my biased survey of these recent results. Now,
For arbitrary, this highly non-homogeneous result, it walks over any field, or there also
no, okay. This thing here works over fields of characteristic 0, or at least large characteristic
even for any arbitrary depth.
for any arbitrary depth. These results, this upper bound is for any field. Yeah, here let's say the field is complex numbers. So, so now in the next few sessions, you'll see lower bound proofs. I wanted to just give a very brief overview of lower bound proofs. You'll see, I will skip all the important details. I will give just my perspective on lower bound proofs, or at least how I have been trying to approach lower bound proofs. And you'll see more details in the following talk. So let's look at this upper lower bound. So let me recall, the lower bound was for a representation like this. You have a polynomial of degree d. You want to write it as a sum of product of homogeneous polynomials of small degree, say degree root d. So more generally, this is the sort of the high level strategy that I have been trying to implement for not only these kind of circuits, but more generally for any kind of circuit. That essentially you first look at the circuit, you try to find some geometric property of, let's say, the terms in a circuit, or of the overall circuit itself, which sort of tells these geometric properties should give you some intuition of what kind of weakness this circuit model has. So in our case, this is a shallow circuit. It's essentially a depth 4 circuit. Now, one tries to express this geometric property, tries to capture it by the rank of some big matrix in the following way, that if f has that geometric property, the rank of the matrix M of f should be small. And now you find an explicit polynomial for which the rank of the matrix is large. And if your numbers work out, then you have a lower bound, depending on how large this is and how small this is. Right? Now, one thing I just wanted to point out that this can be fairly delicate. For example, in these recent results, I want to give you some idea of these numbers, of how big is this big, how large is this large. So, first of all, these lower bounds involve looking at matrices which are of size roughly d to the d square, or 2 to the d square log d. Now, this is for a polynomial of degree d on d square variables. So, let me just put this number in perspective. This is like d to the d square. Now, this polynomial fd itself, it has d square variables and degree d. So, it has roughly d square plus d, choose d many monomials, which is roughly 2 to the d log d. The size of this matrix that one looks at is much larger. It's 2 to the d square log d, much larger than the number of monomials in the polynomial. And it will turn out that in most of these cases, we will be able to give explicit polynomials where the rank of m of f is essentially close to the size of m of f. This is the size of the matrix is a trivial upper bound on the rank, and in most of these cases, we will show the rank is very close to this trivial upper bound by a polynomial factor. Now I want to give you some idea of this relatively small versus this relatively large. So, it turns out that here the rank of m of f will be roughly the size of m of f, which is 2 to the d square log d. It turns out that if you take the most important term in the exponent for rank of m of f, rank of m of a small circuit, it's almost the same as this. It's the main term is d square log d also there. So these arguments are very delicate. You have to look at more terms. So you look at the next term. It turns out that the next term is roughly d minus d square also in both the cases. So you don't see anything. And you look on the next few terms, and the next term is 2 to the root d log d here, and here it's root d log d. So there's a difference. The constants here differ, and the constant here, it should be the other way around. This is a root d log d, and this is 2 root d log d. And now it is this ratio which is very important, the ratio of this rank to this rank. This ratio is roughly 2 to the root d log d. This is how you get the lower bound. And yeah, I just wanted to tell you about these numbers just to show you how delicate some of these lower bound arguments are. Oh, sorry, there's another typo here. This d square log d. Yeah, and yeah, this should be a 1 here and 2 is here. This is the larger quantity. Okay, so you will see parts of this strategy implemented in the next few talks. in various circuit models how one constructs a large matrix whose rank captures, in some sense, the complexity of the polynomial in that thing. Just to wrap this up, let me tell you very quickly how these steps go for this particular case, and you will see a more refined lower bound where all these steps will be made more precise and more refined. So very roughly, the geometric property of a shallow circuit that we use is the following, that when something is computed by a small depth 4 circuit, you can write it as a sum of terms where each term is a product of low degree polynomials, right? So now this equivalently, this means that the variety of each term is a low degree is a union of low degree hypersurfaces. So the variety of a polynomial is just the set of zeros of that polynomial in the algebraic closure of the field. And it turns out that this means that in particular this variety has lots of high order singularities. And take this as an exercise, that if you have a variety which is a union of hypersurfaces, essentially where those hypersurfaces intersect, you get singularities, and where 5 hypersurfaces intersect, you get order 5 singularities, and so on. So that's a geometric property that is used. Now, using a theorem by Hilbert, you can translate this geometric property into a rank condition. Essentially, let me just quickly tell you that if you have a variety, the fact that the variety has lots of points on it can be captured by rank of a linear map. And in our case, the variety that we are interested in is the variety of kth order derivatives of a polynomial. And Hilbert already knew this, that he had devised a linear map whose rank corresponded to how large is the variety, how many points it has. And the third thing is we need to give an explicit polynomial, and we need to lower bound the rank of the matrix corresponding to that polynomial. And now we have some nice techniques to do this. So these matrices are exponentially large, extremely large matrices. You can imagine that understanding the rank of such matrices might be a difficult thing. But one thing is we just need to lower bound the rank. The other thing is we have some techniques for lower bounding the rank, and one of them is very simple. So consider a very large matrix. Suppose if it contains a submatrix which is, let's say, upper triangular, then this submatrix will you can use it to lower bound the rank. In fact, the size of this upper triangular submatrix is itself a lower bound on the rank of the entire matrix. The one other result is a very neat lemma by Noga-Elon, which essentially quantifies this informal. Let me just give the informal statement here. Suppose you have a matrix where the columns are orthogonal, then the matrix will be of full rank, right? Because the columns are linearly independent. Now, this lemma shows that essentially if the columns are almost orthogonal, I haven't quantified it, then the matrix will have large rank. And this can also be used to lower bound the rank. So this is how some of these proofs go. So that's it. Let me just conclude. We had these two basic questions. Can explicit polynomials be efficiently computed? We have some weak results here. We are at one point we seem to be very close to VP versus VNP resolving that, but now it's no longer that clear. But anyway, for some smaller subclass of computation, that's something that we call regular formulas, these techniques do lead to super polynomial lower bounds. And also, for whether computation can be efficiently parallelized or not, here we have much more detailed answers. We don't have the optimal answer in all cases, but it seems like we are very close to resolving this.
Time for a question or two before the break.
Yeah.
On the second bullet,
Yeah.
what's the reason for the second statement? Any improvement will yield employment manual allowance?
Oh, okay. Let me tell you. Yeah. So it goes like this. So you want to show that some explicit polynomial does not have circuits of size n to the 100. Let's say n to the 100 could be any polynomial in n. So now you reduce. So you have your favorite polynomial. Let's say the Hamiltonian. Suppose it had n to the 100 size circuit. You could squash the depth of the circuit to depth 4. And now, because of the upper bounds, we know the size would blow up from s to the root d, which would be roughly n to the root d. So if you have proved a lower bound better than n to the root d, then you have super polynomial lower bounds. Yeah.
So I think you briefly alluded to the fact that if you get better lower bound, like let's say you get lower bounds separating VP versus VMP, that would has connections to obtaining a deterministic algorithm, polynomial time algorithm. So can you elaborate a little bit what exactly is the connection?
So the connection actually uses something more stronger, that you need to prove exponential lower bounds. Then you there's a sort of a very generic hardness versus randomness trade-off kind of results, which convert very good exponential kind of lower bounds into sub-exponential identity testing algorithms.
But not polynomial. So can one get polynomial time deterministic polynomial identity?
Yeah, polynomial time I don't know. I don't think it's known. The best that we know is probably quasi-polynomial time, with the best kind of lower bounds that you can hope for.